want to talk about something that I think is interesting to think about this game. I've heard a lot of people talk about this in the past, but I think I have sort of developed a perspective on this, or sort of my own ideas that I haven't really heard mentioned. Now, I don't really watch a lot of content on this topic, I just have seen that it exists for this game and a lot of games. As to the lore of the game, what is the story that the game is trying to tell with all of these bizarre creatures and, structures and everything. And this is sort of a game theory thing. I'm not going to sit here and tell you that the creeper is a plant, if you remember that classic. But what I'm going to do is at least try to bring my perspective of the story and what I think is important in a story. Now, I think I look at a story a little bit differently than most people do. And what I mean by that is, say, take like a recent sort of, I don't know, storyline, or like a movie, show, or book or something. Right? There's a character that does certain things. It's all accounted for. There's like origins for things, and there's usually mysteries left, but there's like an intended exact storyline that happens. Now, of course, this game is not meant to be that way exactly, because it's open-ended. It's, supposed to be the story that you sort of tell yourself as you play the game. That's important. But there is something with all these structures and mobs, and of course it can't just be there was a man named Steve and he killed the Ender Dragon and it was glorious. Of course, whatever you do in your world is that world's sort of story. But the main progression of the game, I think, does contain elements of a story that are worth talking about. So, what I mean when I say I don't think about it the same way that I think people try to approach sort of understanding the meaning behind this. Another example that's closer to what I think would be something more mythological. It's a mystery where I don't know where the dragon came from in Beowulf, right? To use a dragon as an example, which I think is important for this, but it's not really talked about as much, I don't think. You could correct me if I'm wrong, but the point of the story isn't who is the dragon, how was this creature born, why did it come here, why did it start attacking these people. All of these things are there, but what's important is that there is symbolism behind it. Of course, the dragon in all stories almost represents, your greatest fear, the greatest obstacle. You could think, even in cases where you don't have to slay the dragon, you still have to tame it, usually. And that could be seen as sort of the same story. So it's sort of an amalgamation of several predators that humans have had in the past. Especially in the fact that it's reptilian, and we're naturally afraid of reptilian things, or pillagers that are standing right behind us. Anyway, I think we can apply that to the Ender Dragon, of course. It's very fitting that the final boss of this game is the Ender Dragon. Now, I won't get into the Wither in this, although I do think it's interesting to point out the Wither. But, as with most things, or rather, not with most things, I think this understanding Minecraft's story and like what's intended begins with the end. So I was going to include a part where I was going to very smugly say, look, this is an Enderman. He's 3 blocks tall, and then come over here and show that the doorway was 2 blocks tall, but it's actually 3 blocks tall and 2 blocks wide. I just completely did not remember this. However, I do have to say, even though these are technically Enderman friendly, you get loot that cannot be worn by said Enderman. Horse armor? There's no horses in the end. So they have all this armor. They want to protect their diamond stuff. They built these structures, but why do they have human armor? So as you can see, you know, it is 3 blocks tall. I can't believe I misremembered that. But it is worth noting that they have these human tools and human armor pieces in these structures that presumably were built by the Endermen, because who else? I mean, shulkers can't place blocks, and it looks like they are blocks. Some sort of turret built. I think you could even think of them as a snow golem in a way, for the Endermen. Why, like, were they humans that transformed into Endermen? I mean, that's the most logical thing to think about next. Now, I think it's also worth noting that there's an Endermite, and, you know, what's really close to the Ender Portal? The silverfish spawner. So it's logical to think some of the silverfish went into the end, and somehow it contorted them over time. I can also point out some things in the Nether that are, I think, related to this. Now, this is an interesting structure. I don't think it's particularly mysterious. I will say the advancement being called "Those Were the Days" is kind of interesting. But there's clearly these piglins that have just been living in the Nether as sort of natives, and you know, they have mostly gold items and things that make sense for them to use. I guess not netherite, but you could argue these guys were netherite or something, which is why they're so strong. But this is a specific place for the piglins to live, which means that they have that. They have their own place to live that they built. You could argue it was built by players and then got taken over, but I think that it, a sign against that is the chiseled blackstone, which I don't see any here. I don't really know exactly how these things are laid out, but the fact that there's a pig nose, I think, is a clear sign that these were built by the piglins. Now, of course, you could see there's the bastion with all the piglins. They're kind of their own thing, but the reason that I'm sort of bringing up piglins in this as well, I'll get to the fortress in a second. The piglins, or I think it might only be the hoglins, but they're afraid of the warped fungus, and it's called warped, which kind of implies it's been changed in a way that it wasn't really supposed to be changed in, if that makes sense. I'm sure you know what I mean. And it's, you know, the hoglins are afraid of it. It's kind of unnatural. That's where all the Endermen are. So there's some sort of warping, changing over time nature when it comes to things that are Ender. I think the warped stuff goes hand in hand with the Endermen. Of course, I believe that the Striders like warped fungus, so it's not exactly one-to-one, but a lot of what I think about this came sort of before a lot of updates. I mean, even before piglins. A lot of these ideas, I think, were not necessarily consciously decided by Notch, but just something to think about. With the Nether Fortress, I guess I'll show that now. There are no piglins here. I guess there's zombie piglins, but they're everywhere, right? They've always been inhabiting these fortresses. Or rather, something about these fortresses makes them zombified. There are these guys, though. And these remind me of another mob, seeing as they're 3 blocks tall and, you know, a completely black version of another mob. They remind me of an Enderman, in a way, which I just find a little bit interesting since they're here and they're related to another boss. The other figures here are the Blazes. Here's a stray over here, or a few of them. So, you could say these were built by the Blazes. Of course, the doorways in this are 3 blocks tall to account for the wither skeletons. Of course, that's a gameplay decision. Don't know why they're growing mushrooms here. But I just thought it was worth looking at this structure. Now, you need to come here to beat the game, of course. So I think it's part of the full story that I'm trying to take into account. These guys are very, very important to that. The wither skeletons are important to the wither, of course. And they live here. Clearly this was built by whatever they came from. Which could be Enderman, just saying. Endermen could have turned into wither skeletons, just like presumably humans turned into skeletons. Or people could have turned into these blaze creatures. I mean, they look human-sized. Why are they 2 blocks tall with the head if they're just floating rods? Anyway. All of these things are meant to be mysterious, of course. So you have these guys living in the Nether Fortress. This is also very mysterious, because it's like there's sort of, the blazes, they look like they're kind of humanoid, but they're not. Like, why would they be the same height as a human? They clearly either used to be or are modeled after that or something. Then there's the wither skeletons, which I think are sort of unintentional, maybe, but foils to the Endermen, where they're 3 blocks tall. They're a solid black, like, version of sort of something else in the game, in a way. Just worth mentioning. It's another thing like that. I don't really think it's that significant to what I'm talking about here, but, we could speculate about what are the blazes. Were the Endermen people who changed? They built the mine shafts, they built the strongholds and everything. But I kind of want to not delve into that too much, because I don't think that's what's important. Now, I've been talking about that for however long, but I want to make the case that the Enderman isn't necessarily like other people that have built, these structures around, even if that might literally be what they're supposed to be. I want to make the case that the Enderman is you, because I think they are a good representation of the Jungian shadow, the shadow self. Now, if you've ever played something like Celeste, this is a theme that is in so much stuff, but I think it presents itself in Minecraft as well. Not to get too like overthinking about this, but it looks like the player. The Enderman looks like a tall, shadowy version of the player. Now, a literal shadow follows you everywhere. Endermen can just come right to your location. But what's interesting is they don't attack you unless you look at them. So the only danger that you get from Endermen is if you dare to interact with them or to look at them. And I think this is perfect symbolism for, the shadow self. If you're not familiar with this concept, and I could be getting this wrong, it's sort of the parts of yourself that you don't like, the parts of yourself that you'd wish that you could ignore. And I think it was Carl Jung that believed somebody to fully become the best person they could be should actually learn to purposefully lean into some of these traits that they don't like and actually integrate them into their personality better. Which, what better way to do that than to get pearls of wisdom from choosing to purposefully look at that thing that you're afraid of about yourself. Of course, the Ender Pearl is named a pearl. I think that's a coincidence, but I think it goes into what I'm saying here, and I think you get what I mean. You sort of get the power of the Enderman from this. You sort of get, the ability to move like they do when you, choose to take on that challenge yourself. Something that a lot of players would find, more scary. This gets deeper, of course, because I mentioned the dragon. That's the classic, horrifically scary thing in every, fantasy tale. The only way you can get to the dragon, the only way you can even get to the dragon, or even understand what that dragon is that you have to defeat, is if you're willing to face, these sorts of qualities of yourself that you don't like. If you're willing to face your fears, it could just be an analogy for fear, I guess, as well. But of course, that's not enough, for the experience of sight. You also, usually have to go through more rigorous challenges than that. What better way to represent, a challenge or perhaps, suffering to overcome than hell itself? I think the blazes are clearly a representation of suffering in some way. They're literally on fire. Now they're shooting fire at you. They don't seem to mind or anything, but all of this is to say, the Enderman, a very tall creature, looks human, looks like you, can go to where you are, attacks you when you look at it. It's as if it is your shadow. and you have to face it. And the blazes, of course, you know, they're burning. They're like a burning version of a human in hell. But you're going there on purpose, you know, unlike the piglins, which may be representing greed, you know, pigs with gold. You were there on purpose. And I think the true meaning of, like, the story of Minecraft, the takeaway, despite all the mysterious things you can argue about, is that only by combining the pearls of wisdom you gain from willingly looking at your own shadow with the spoils that you gain from choosing to venture through hell for a purpose, can you gain sight, you know, the eye, the third eye, the sight towards your ultimate goal, which is, as it is for all people in all stories, at least all stories that I really like, defeating the dragon, ultimately. Anyway, I think that's about it. Thank you for watching.